Okay, so you're all very welcome to the session today where we're going to be looking at Turnitin, which is NTU's potential plagiarism detection system. As always, if you have any queries, questions, or comments, please feel free to put that into the chat or else to ask a question using the Q&A feature here in Zoom. So in the session today, we're just going to run through briefly, I suppose, what Turnitin is, the process of using Turnitin, how to access the results of Turnitin's potential plagiarism reports, how to interpret those, which is as important as the actual setting up the plagiarism assignment itself. I'm going to talk a little bit about submission storage options and also a fairly new feature, how to submit a report on behalf of a student to Turnitin. So that's a useful kind of relatively recent feature. And then we just have a couple of suggestions about how to use Turnitin effectively within the broader MTU context. So as I said, any queries, questions, anything at all, please do feel free to shout away into chat or to use the Q&A feature. So Turnitin is a plagiarism detection system. It checks it checks student submissions for potentially unoriginal content, which is to say potentially plagiarized material by comparing them to web sources, publications, submissions from other students. Turnitin is, I guess, really the leader in terms of potential plagiarism detection systems, and it's integrated into the Canvas system in MTU and is available for use by all MTU lecturers and students. So within the overall, I suppose, digital learning ecosystem, Turnitin sits in the kind of whole assessment category. So rather than just blathering through slides, what I want to do is I would prefer to give a bit of time to demonstrating the whole process for setting up a Turnitin assessment and how to use it and interpret the results. So the way that you can use Turnitin, the most straightforward way is if we go into our module in Canvas, we go into the assignments area and we create a new assignment by clicking on the blue assignment button. We can do our usual spiel here. We'll call this sample, turn it in assignment two, just to differentiate it. So we give it a name, we give it the brief, we give it 100 points. And the way that you would use Turnitin is that you would set the submission type to online and to select either a file upload or a text entry. But generally, our recommendation for most assignments would be a file upload. Basically, if you want a student to give you their work, to be able to review it and give them feedback on it, online and file upload is what we'd recommend. But you'll notice when we select text entry or file upload, a box appears down here for plagiarism review. So it's only when we select text entry or file upload that we'll have the option to use Turnitin. And from there, we're very simply going to select Turnitin. So when we select that, this gives us a number of additional options. I'm going to talk through these in a bit more detail later in the session, but just very briefly, the first option is to where you want to store submissions. And the options there are a standard paper repository, an institution paper repository, or do not store the submitted papers. What this essentially means, what this setting is essentially deciding is when students submit to this assignment that we're setting up, we're telling Turnitin what we wanted to do with those student submissions. If we select standard paper repository, what that will do is it will basically add any student submissions to this assignment to MTU's kind of global database. So the way that, or excuse me, to Turnitin's kind of global database, the way Turnitin works is that when it receives a submission, it checks that submission against it's it kind of the options here for website content and periodicals and journals and publications and so on and so forth, but also it'll check it against any other submission that a student has made to Turnitin, be that within MTU or outside MTU. So the standard paper repository is basically that kind of global database. It's any and every submission which any student in any university has made to Turnitin. The institutional paper repository, then, what that refers to is basically just MTU student submissions. So that is submissions that have only been made by MTU students. And do not store the submitted papers, basically says is what it says in the tin. So when we're selecting this option, we are basically telling Turnitin, okay, for any submissions that students make to this assignment, put it into your global repository. So universities in Australia and America and England and China and across Europe can check, the submissions that MTU students are going to give against this assignment. If you're not comfortable with that, you can select institution paper repository. And what that does is it basically will put any submissions against this assignment into an MTU Turnitin repository. So all that means is basically that any student work which is submitted to the submission, it Turnitin will compare submissions against kind of, future student work, but it won't leave MTU. It will only remain within MTU. And finally, the final option is to not store the submitted papers. And all that means is that students will submit against this assignment, Turnitin will check their work against student repository, institutional repository, website content, so on and so forth. But it's not going to store submissions to this assignment. So essentially, Turnitin is not going to retain any of the submissions that are going to be made against this particular assignment. That probably is more confusing than I intended it to be, but hopefully it makes some kind of sense. If it's up to yourself what you are comfortable with, but if you're unsure, you could always ask students, is it okay if your submissions against this assignment get added to Turnitin's global repository, which is the standard paper one, or just the MTU one, which is the institution paper repository, or would you prefer if your work is not stored or kind of entered into Turnitin's databases? Compare submissions against then is essentially telling Turnitin what to compare submissions to this assignments against. And again, similar to the drop down here, the student repository is MTU or Turnitin's global kind of repository of submitted student work. So that is basically a big database of student submissions from any university that is using Turnitin. The institutional repository is just MTU students. So that is a database of submissions to Turnitin only by MTU students. Website content is what it says in the tin. It's content that is online, and periodicals, journals, and publications again is fairly self-explanatory. So Norma has a good question asking, do we need to ask students permission for where we want to store or check it? Technically, no, Norma, because I suppose this is MTU systems and this is MTU student submissions. It is ultimately up to yourself. But I would say, and look, this is to each individual lecturer's preference. If you're not sure what you'd prefer, you could just make the offer to students. Or if you're uncomfortable with students' work being submitted to Turnitin and being used to compare against, student work from other places, I would say the safest option is do not store the submitted papers. But in general, where people would select the standard paper repository or the institution paper repository, or the logic behind this is very simply that, okay, some students are going to submit against a submission this year. If I have a new group of students coming in next year and I'm going to give them what is essentially the same assignment, then I want to be sure that, students from academic year 26-27 aren't just submitting work that was done by a buddy of theirs in 25-26, in which case you would select the institution paper repository or the standard paper repository. But yeah, to answer your question, you don't have to ask permission. It's to each individual lecturer's preference ultimately what they want to store the submissions against. There's a couple of additional options down here for the similarity report, which will exclude bibliographic materials, exclude quoted materials, and exclude small sources. You can turn these on after the student work is submitted, so I wouldn't worry too much about them. But very briefly, excluding bibliographic material just means that essentially this is telling Turnitin if there is like a references section or a bibliographic section in the student work, you can not count that as plagiarized material. Same if something is in quotes, do not count it towards the potential plagiarism check. And equally small sources, once you select it, you can say, okay, well, if a particular sentence has no more than 5 words, don't count it as plagiarized material. But like I said, you can turn these on in the similarity report anyway. An important setting as well is whether you want to show reports to students immediately, after it's graded, after the due date, or never at all. So why this is relevant is, and it's kind of a binary option really when you get down to it. If we decide to show the report to students immediately, what that means is that students will submit against this particular assignment, and they will, if it's set to immediately, they will within an hour be able to view the results of the plagiarism detection report. So if the due date for this particular assignment is the end of the week, and I as a student submit today, what this means is that I'm going to submit the report. I'm going to be able to see the potential plagiarism. And then what I might decide to do, if I decide that plagiarism report is too high, is I might, amend it, improve it, make it less, make it appear with a lower plagiarism detection score before I submit on the 14th. If the report is set to after the assignment is graded, or after the due date, or never, what that means is basically from a student perspective, I will submit, we'll say after the assignment is graded. What this means is, as a student, I will submit, let's say on the 14th, and I'm only going to see the results of the plagiarism detection after you, as the lecturer, has reviewed it, given marks and feedback, so on and so forth, or after the due date, which is after the deadline for submission has passed, or never at all. Essentially, what this means is, you can imagine the difference between these three and immediately is basically, if it's never, or after the due date, or after the assignment is graded, basically that means the student submits, you as the instructor get to see the plagiarism detection report results, but the student doesn't. So it means they don't get to amend their kind of submission before the due date. If it's set to immediately, what I'm essentially doing is I'm giving students the chance to submit, let's say tomorrow, to review the plagiarism detection score. And if that score is high, to amend their work to bring it down before the deadline of the 14th. So the main differentiation there is, do you want to give students the opportunity to check the results of the plagiarism detection against what they're submitting before the deadline, or after the deadline? If it's before the deadline, you're essentially giving them a chance to amend what they're submitting to bring the plagiarism detection down. If it's any of the other options, you're essentially not really giving them that chance. They're going to submit, and they're not going to see the results of their plagiarism detection until after it's graded, after the due date, or ever at all, which is essentially removing that option to them. So again, we don't have any particular recommendations there. That is up to each individual lecturer. Uh, what that really comes down to is, do you want to give students the chance to review the plagiarism detection score before they kind of finally submit, or do you not want to? So again, that is to each individual lecturer's kind of preference. We don't really have a kind of a recommendation around it. If it's anything other than immediately, you're essentially taking the more punitive option, as in they submit and they're not going to have a chance to amend the plagiarism, the results of the potential plagiarism, until it's too late. If you set it to immediately, you're giving them the chance to submit to see what the plagiarism detection score is, and then to amend accordingly. So again, that is up to each individual lecturer in terms of what they may or may not like to do. But once that assignment is created, what we can do to access the plagiarism detection score is very simply, we go back into the assignment. So we'll go into this one I created earlier. We can click on the speed grader. And what this will do then is, very simply, it will show us the student's work. And as part of that, it will have this percentage score next to it. So within SpeedGrader, this is the student's original file, and this is the results of the Turnitin potential plagiarism detection. So that's giving us a 38. What we can do, if we want more detail on that, is very simply click on the percentage, and this then will bring it into the Turnitin plagiarism report, or the Turnitin analysis report. So the way that this is set up is that the student work will be displayed on the left-hand side. And as you can see there, it's color coded. Those color codings align to different instances of potential plagiarism over here. There's a number of ways that you can, I suppose, interpret this or make your way through this. One way to do it is, so what we have over here are called match groups. So that is kind of groupings of potential instances of plagiarism. You can see that 33% of these are basically matches that aren't cited or aren't in quotation marks, and there's 7 missing kind of citations. If we want to, we can click on sources. And what sources will do is it will give us a kind of a percentage breakdown of the different sources where Turnitin thinks it's picked up potential plagiarism. And again, you can scroll through the piece if you want to be able to kind of see the different kind of color schemes, so on and so forth. So ways of doing this. One way is you can very simply just kind of look through the content over on the left-hand side here. You can see here that the various kind of instances are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And what we can do if we want to is we can very simply click on the on anything we see colored. And what Turnitin will do is it will pop us where it thinks it's detecting this from. So for example, here we can see it's student papers, which were submitted to MTU already. If we go down the page a bit, we can click on this one here, and it will indicate that this is potentially from the University of Lancaster. The way in which all of this works is that we can, examine the plagiarism detection score by simply scrolling through the content and clicking on the various elements as they appear, and we'll get kind of content available over on this side. The other way we can do it, if we want to something maybe that's a little less laborious, is we're just going to look on the right-hand side over here on the various sources that are available to us. And what this gives us is it gives us a useful kind of breakdown of the percentage. So if this is coming in at 38%, we can see that student papers previously submitted to MTU make up 27% of that 38. This content from repository.ul.ac.uk is making up 3%. 3%, 2% is coming from nature.com, so on and so forth. So this is maybe a more useful way, I think, of interpreting the potential plagiarism score. If we know that, for example, that this is coming in at 27%, we know that that is the vast majority of where the potential plagiarism is being detected. Um, uh, that's a good question, Nora. I'll just cover this section if that's okay, and then I'll come back to your question then. But yeah, just to finish, if we know that this is kind of constituting 27%, then we don't need to read through the entire thing. We can see that this is kind of obviously where most of the potential plagiarism is being detected. So if we click into this source, it gives us a bit of a breakdown in terms of where all the various text blocks are kind of coming from. And if we click on the eye icon here, we can get a little bit more information about the metadata. So about the the original paper which Turnitin thinks this content has been taken from. So that gives us an idea of the external ID of the email of the student who submitted it and the submission title that they were given. And we can also download that source file. So we can actually download the original kind of piece that this was submitted or kind of taken from. So that's a useful way of just identifying, okay, where does Turnitin thinks the majority of that 38% is coming from. Another useful feature which we have is, let's say I set up a kind of an assignment earlier in the semester, students submitted against it, and then for the second assignment, students are kind of submitting content, but for the second assignment, it's okay, or students should be reusing a lot of the content they submitted against the first one. So basically, if I'm confident that this source here is not actually plagiarism, it's just the results of Turnitin picking up kind of a previous submission. Something which we can do with all of the different sources here is we can click on this kind of strike through icon to exclude the source. And what that basically does is it's telling Turnitin, hey, I am confident that this source here that you're picking up as 27% of the 38%, I'm confident that's not plagiarized material. And what happens when we exclude the source is we're basically telling Turnitin, ignore this. And you can see then that this is dropped from 38 down to 20%. So by turning off the various sources, again, when you're confident that this isn't plagiarized material, what that has the effect of doing is it basically has the effect of dropping down the plagiarism detection score bit by bit. So that's a useful way of just being able to kind of adjust on the fly the potential plagiarism that you think is cropping up for you. And bit by bit, you can see as I'm turning things off, that is dropping the overall similarity score down quite a bit. In addition, if we want to turn back on any of the sources that we've turned off, what we can do is when we start excluding sources, you'll see this option for how many exclusions you've made. And if you want to turn that on or off, you can just hit the exclude all sources again, or the include all sources button. And when we go back, we can see that now is back up to 38%. In addition to this, we also have a number of filters that are available to us. So again, we're familiar with these options from when we set it up. We might say, okay, I don't actually want to check this particular content against, any student work or any internet content. I'm only really worried about periodicals and journals and publications. And when we hit apply filters, yeah, you can see now that's dropped down to 10%. Again, similar to the exclusion filter options that were in the kind of when we were setting it up, we can decide I want to exclude the bibliography, I want to exclude any text in quotes, I want to exclude any cited text. You can hit apply filters, and that's dropping it down then to 0%. So yeah, so there is the option as well to be able to mess around with the findings too, just and the options available just to try and get a more accurate representation of genuine potential plagiarism. It's unlikely that you'd need it, but just in case you do, if you want to download the original file or download like a PDF of the analysis report, you can do so using the button up here, which will allow you to download the similarity report or the original submission. If you need to contact Turnitin support about anything as well, they might sometimes look for the submission ID. So if you click on the eye icon up here, you can access a bit more information about it and the important content there, which they may look for is the submission ID. If you need any help in understanding Turnitin or navigating the system, there is also this blue icon down here, and what that will do is it will allow you to search the various guides and supports for Turnitin also. Now, to return to your question, Norma, would it be possible to set the second attempt to submit after the due date so it could be seen their plagiarism score for first attempt? My apologies. I'm not sure I entirely follow that, Norma. So would it be possible to set the second attempt to submit after the due date so it could be seen their plagiarism score for the first attempt? I think I know what you mean, Norma, but maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong or right with that. I'm just going to jump back into my slides because we talk a little bit about this, or kind of this is something that we've tried to cover before. So yeah, what you might want is you might want your students to be able to submit a draft into Turnitin or into Canvas and then resubmit. But you only want Turnitin to kind of pick up on the second one. Or maybe you want students to be able to submit against the first assignment, the kind of draft assignment, to get to be able to review their plagiarism score and then to be able to submit the second one. And the second one to not pick up on kind of any submissions to the first. So in that kind of situation, so if I want a situation where students get to submit a draft, I get to give them feedback on it, they get to kind of see any potential plagiarism coming up, but that kind of doesn't count towards the second final submission. The way you would do that is for the draft as a submission, for the first one, the settings that you would set for this would be very simply that you put it up, you set the settings up, you set the report to show to students immediately because you want them to be able to see that. But the important element there is that you do not store this draft against the submitted papers. So what that means is in this kind of instance, students will submit against this draft assignment. They will be able to see the report immediately. but Turnitin isn't going to record any submissions against this assignment. So if I have a final assignment and let's say they're going to repeat a lot of the content they put in against this draft assignment, because of the way I've set this up, particularly do not store against the submitted papers, it just means that the final submission is not going to pick up anything, or it's not going to kind of recognize kind of anything submitted in the draft assignment, or it's not going to count that towards the final submission. So that should keep the plagiarism score for the final submission kind of realistic or kind of somewhat accurate. A couple of bits of advice then, just in terms of, I suppose, the results. If you think there is an instance of plagiarism, the recommendation is that you contact your HOD or your module coordinator in any cases or suspected cases of academic misconduct as per the academic honesty and integrity policy. And I believe that there is a new iteration of the academic honesty and integrity policy currently in development, but it is available at the moment at mycat.ie/academic honesty and integrity. We've covered that. If we want students to be able to submit a draft, review their plagiarism score, but that not kind of messing up the process for a final submission, which will also be checked against Turnitin. In terms of AI, detection of AI developed content, there is, all the research indicates that there is not really any available tool that will capture instances of Gen AI developed content with 100%. So there's a broad range of research which indicates that no tool is capable essentially of being able to pick up content which is developed using AI, Gen AI tools like ChatGPT. There's a number of reasons for this. I'm not going to bore you with them, but essentially, the current tools like Turnitin are just, or any tool is just, it's not feasible for them to be able to detect Gen AI developed content. The other thing about relying on tools like that is there is a strong potential for false positives, where something like Turnitin might say, oh, this content was developed using ChatGPT, but it actually wasn't. It's a student's original work, and that can lead to obviously very serious and kind of difficult and traumatic situations for everyone involved. So the recommendations in terms of, trying to deal with Gen AI developed content is, instead of trying to catch it, try more so to prevent it. Set clear AI assessment parameters for your assessment. So if you're giving students assessment, communicate to students if you are happy for them to use Gen AI for their submissions or not. And if you are happy for them to use it, how much of it can they use? Should they only be able to use it for tidying up their language? Should they only be able to use it for generating ideas? Should they only be able to use it as kind of almost like a research assistant? Or do you not want them to use it at all? Or can they use it in whatever way they want? Um, Something which we would recommend is highlight the presence of Turnitin. So it's maybe slightly obfuscating things, but to say, and I will be using Turnitin to catch, you know, plagiarism in all of your work. So it's more so suggesting that Turnitin will catch Gen AI developed content as opposed to actually genuinely relying on it. The other suggestion then is to very simply consider, focusing on elements that Gen AI tools do not do well. So things that tools like ChatGPT are not good at, they're not good at reflection. They're not good at dealing with real world data. They're not good at, uh, you know, any kind of human interaction elements. So mm, without promoting kind of full unsupported assessment redesign, consider maybe amending assessments just so that, maybe there's more of a continuous assessment element, so that you're focusing more on the process of assessment as opposed to everything being around the end outcome. And also consider talking to students about kind of Gen AI, because certainly all of the research indicates that they are as concerned, if not more concerned, about the impact that Gen AI will have on their education as all of us are. On that topic, if you are interested in learning more, or kind of accessing some resources that can help a little bit with kind of the whole AI assessment elements, and kind of what I mentioned in terms of, trying to prevent it, or trying to clarify it as opposed to trying to catch it. There is a working group on Gen AI within MTU, and there is a resource, a Canvas module, which we've developed. You can access it through Cork catalog.mtu.ie browse/AI MTU staff. And the MTU AI assessment scale briefs basically is a Canvas module which provides a number of sample briefs, which you can use. So for example, if you want your students to write an essay, what is available is a number of essay briefs that you can take and customize and amend however you see fit, based on how much level 5 or how little level 1 you want students to be able to use AI. So that is available as an additional resource also. Otherwise, in terms of supports, if you go to helpcenter.turnitin.com, basically you don't have to worry about those last few letters. That will allow you to access Turnitin's various help docs, but you can also submit a request. So if you're having difficulties with Turnitin, you can contact a Turnitin support agent directly by going to that URL and submitting a request. Equally, we have a number of help articles pertaining to Turnitin on our uh, help doc kind of space. So basically, if you go to tel.cit.ie and you click into staff resources, you can access our help docs there, along with our YouTube channel if you want to view back the recording of this particular session. So, and where that was a real kind of whirlwind tour of Turnitin, but just wanted to try and cover, I suppose, as many of the resources as I possibly could. Sorry, one final thing that I will show actually, just in case it's of use, you might have a situation where a student, let's say, is not able to submit to the assignment that you set up in Canvas, but they still want to kind of provide you with their work. So if you're unsure, or if you want to submit on behalf of a student, if we go into the grade section, we can see that the sample Turnitin assignment that we set up, this one here, is available, or let's say this one here. So something which you can do is, if you go into the gradebook for this particular module, if you identify the column that relates to a particular assignment that you've set up, what you can do is you can click into the cell against the particular student name and click on the little arrow here. And what this button up here will do is let you submit for a student. So if we click on that, we can grab a file, we can upload a particular submission, and through that then we will be able to submit on behalf of the student. So even if the student can't get at the Turnitin submission, you can submit on their behalf if they, for example, email you their work. So just a final little handy kind of tool. And just on that topic, if for example, you had a student who is doing a master's by research or similar, they want you to check their work for potential plagiarism, something which you can do is you can set up a Turnitin assignment. So we'll just put some gibberish into this, make it into a Turnitin assignment, and hit save without publishing. What we can do then is the student can't get at it, or let's say if we wanted to check a student's work without them directly submitting, we can go into grades, we can find that unpublished resource, and what we can do is we can follow that approach to submit for the student. So we can basically submit kind of work without them being able to visibly see an extra assignment in Canvas. So just before I finish up, can I ask, does anybody have any questions? And if you don't, there's no problem at all. Maybe just give me a okay or thumbs up or something, just so I know that you're happy enough with all that. Otherwise, please feel free to put any questions into the chat or into the Q&A feature here in Zoom. Okay, that's great. In that case, all that's left to do is to say thanks very much, everyone, for coming along and for your time and attention. We'll be providing more training sessions over the coming weeks. You can view those at tel.cit.e/upcoming training. And yeah, the very best of luck to all of you with the start of semester and the coming academic year. So thanks very much, everyone, and take care.